What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another video on my YouTube channel, and I'm making this video because I want to talk about some stuff with the NBA, but I want to start with the Bucks and the Celtics, the matchup that happened this Thursday, a complete obliteration of the Milwaukee Bucks by the Boston Celtics, and I wanted to talk about this game because I think it's really important. Just to preface the conversation, the Bucks were coming off a road trip where they played 5 games in 7 days. They played in Utah and Denver. Those games were a back-to-back. Then they went to Detroit and played Indiana. That was the back end of a back-to-back before the game. So yes, the Bucks came into the game pretty tired. Some unfair disadvantages with the, not unfair, but just some disadvantages with the scheduling there. So that was something that did hinder them going into the game. And the Celtics were coming off some rest, and they were blown out by the Wizards the game before, so they were obviously a little bit more motivated to play Milwaukee on Thursday. But that's besides the point, because these two teams, the Bucks and the Celtics, have been the talk of the talk in the Eastern Conference. People believe these are the two best teams in the Eastern Conference, but I think Bucks fans, Giannis fans in particular, should be very nervous about the Boston Celtics going into this postseason. So let's rewind back to last season. These two teams met in the playoffs. It was a great 7-game series in the Eastern Conference semifinals. Boston obviously advanced. They beat the Bucks without Chris Middleton, but they beat the Bucks for a variety of reasons. One, because Milwaukee's defense was exploited by Boston in that series via the pick and roll and three-pointers. Milwaukee obviously hasn't been known to defend the three a lot with their defense, and that bit them tremendously against the Celtics. The Celtics had games where they would make 20+ threes, and that was very potent in their victory in that series, because in Game 7 they set a franchise record for threes made in a postseason game, and guys like Grant Williams were just lining them up from three. And part of what Milwaukee does in particular, Brook Lopez, I want to start with him. He is a great defensive player. He's turned himself into a great shot blocker, a guy who can guard guys down low. But in a playoff matchup against a team like the Celtics, it doesn't help him that much, because what they do with Brook Lopez is they play a lot of drop coverage, or they will have him as a help defender on guys who are driving to the paint. And this is what creates problems. One, because when they play him in drop coverage, the Celtics can exploit that with pick and rolls, with Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, and a lot of guys who can come off screens and hit shots. And you see a lot of the shots, the three-point looks that the Celtics generate are off that drop coverage. Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, Malcolm Brogdon, you name it, whoever will come off a screen, and they will pull up from three and usually make it because they're wide open. And when you leave an NBA player wide open, they're probably going to make it most of the time. And another way that the Bucks give up a lot of threes against the Celtics, like I just said, overhelping. Lopez will be down low, someone will drive, and then he'll help when there's like already a guy who's smothering the driver of the basketball, and then they'll kick it out to a corner three, wide open. And so I think there is something that the Celtics are getting with the Bucks in terms of matchups. I don't think Brook Lopez is someone that can play a lot against the Celtics, because he's not versatile enough defensively to guard Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. And one other thing, Grayson Allen is not a good matchup for the Celtics either. He should not be starting against Boston, really shouldn't be playing very much against Boston in a playoff series, because he cannot get a shot off against the Celtics because their wings are too athletic, too fast, and they know how to guard him. He can't really drive against the Celtics either, because driving isn't really a strong suit. He's on the Bucks to be a wide open spot up shooter from three, and if he's not making threes and he's not playing defense, there's really no use for him to be on the floor. So that's one thing. The Bucks have to try a smaller lineup against the Celtics, and that is probably going to mean playing Giannis at center. And when it just comes to what the Celtics have done to the Bucks this season, you look at their matchups. They played on Christmas. The Bucks were without Chris Middleton, and they were coming off a pretty rough stretch of games where they were losing. They had lost to Cleveland, Brooklyn, Chicago. All 3 of those games they dropped on the road and in consecutive losses. So they were already reeling at that point in the season. This was before they got super hot, won 16 in a row, captured the number 1 seed. They go to TD Garden on Christmas and get absolutely obliterated by Boston, and it was pretty much the same story. The Celtics made a lot of threes. Jason Tatum went for 41 points. They did a great job defending Giannis, making him earn every basket. He still put up his numbers, 27 points, not bad, but it took him it took a lot for him to get that 27. He had to earn every single one of those points, and he wasn't very efficient. And the Bucks couldn't find offense outside of Giannis because they didn't have a consistent shot creator. And even that's the thing with Chris Middleton back, he looks good, but he's not he's not like a Zach LaVine, Devin Booker type of shooting guard or shot creator where he's quick, electric. He can get his own shot, but it's not to the degree of those guys, and that's something that I would be concerned about because it doesn't look like Chris Middleton is making that much of a difference against the Celtics. So they get obliterated on Christmas, give up a bunch of threes. Giannis doesn't play that well. Tatum goes for 41. And then the second matchup, they played at home in Milwaukee, and the Celtics were basically playing a G League lineup against the Bucks. And that game went to overtime. Giannis got his numbers, 36 points, I believe. Another very hard game. Even though the Celtics were missing all their starters, they still did a great job defending Giannis. And that game went to overtime with, like I said, a G League team for the Celtics. So do you really even consider that a win for the Bucks? If you think about it, not really, because those guys that were on the court aren't really going to be on the court during a playoff series against Milwaukee. So yeah, the Celtics were able to hang with the Bucks even with that lineup. And then when you look at the most recent matchup, a 41-point loss by the Bucks, and it was a lot of things. One, Giannis was struggling with their defense. They were building a wall, not letting him get into the paint. He was settling for jumpers, not making them. All the points that he got, he had to earn through physical play. And that's not really what he wants to do. He wants to be able to drive, get into the lane, kick it out to guys for open shots, and they weren't able to do that. And Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown were going absolutely nuclear. Jason Tatum, another 40 points. Jaylen Brown had 30 points. This season, Jason Tatum is averaging 40.5 points against the Bucks. He's played in 2 out of the 3 games. He scored 41 in the first game, 40 in the most recent game. Jaylen Brown is also going nuclear against Milwaukee. So if the Bucks want to get back to the finals, let's just say they get the 1 seed, make the conference finals, and they play Boston, which I think is most likely what's going to happen. I think they'll beat whoever's in 8th. They'll get by whoever they have to play in the second round. Even though New York and Cleveland could be tough matchups for them, I think they should beat those teams. And I think they're going to play Boston in the conference finals because I don't really trust the Sixers to get it done against the Celtics in the second round. So that's probably who they're going to have to get by if they want to go back to the NBA Finals. They got to figure out how to adjust defensively. I would put guys who can stay in front of Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown on them and not just let them shoot wide open shots. You got to get in their grill, make them earn everything like they do with Giannis. Be physical with them. That's what the Warriors did to the Celtics in the finals. They stuck Andrew Wiggins on him and he stayed on Jason Tatum like glue. And that's part of the reason why Jason Tatum struggled so mightily in last year's finals. So I think the Bucks can take sort of a blueprint from that. But the thing is, they don't really have that super athletic wing defender that they can just attach to him. The most athletic guy on the team that can consistently defend is Giannis, and you don't want him roaming the perimeter the whole time because he's best served as a help guy. And the other guy, Drew Holiday, your other one-on-one defender that you can trust, he can't guard Jason Tatum, so he's probably going to have to stick Jaylen Brown for a majority of that matchup. And so I'm really interested to see if these two teams meet in the postseason again. It'll probably be a long series because it's the playoffs. Teams don't get blown out by 40 in the playoffs that often, so I'm sure all the games will be close, and I'm just going to be looking closely to see what adjustments Mike Budenholzer will make. Will he continue to just let the Celtics rain threes on him? And so that's going to be a pretty interesting matchup in the playoffs if it were to happen. And so another thing that I want to talk about just very briefly is the new CBA agreement in the NBA, because there's a lot of things. I'm going to rattle off some of the things that I think are pretty interesting about it. Draymond Green, obviously one of the most outspoken players in the league, had his thoughts about it. But here's just some of the things. In order to be eligible for the awards like MVP, Defensive Player of the Year, all that stuff, you have to play a minimum of 65 games. And I think the NBA is obviously doing this to combat load management, which is really becoming a huge issue in the league because players are sitting out more often than ever when they're not hurt. And it's really hurting the product because basketball is already a sport where people are not interested in regular season basketball. You saw the All-Star game was at an all-time low in ratings. People are not interested in basketball right now super heavily like they used to be. And when you have stars that are sitting out every other game or back-to-backs, it's really bad for the product and what the NBA is trying to do. So I think that is one way they're trying to combat load management without actually shortening the season, which I don't know if it's going to be. I don't know if it's going to turn out how they want it to. I would have thought they would have shortened the season. Another thing that's being added with the new CBA is an in-season tournament where the winning team, players will receive a $500,000 cash prize. Each player gets $500,000. Not too sure about the particular details of the in-season tournament. They haven't really announced that yet, but that is something that will be coming with the new collective bargaining agreement. Another thing is players are going to be allowed to invest in other teams while actively playing in the league, which means like you have a guy like LeBron James. We obviously know that he's a big business guy. He's going to want to get into some investments. He's talked about owning an NBA team when he retires. He's already, with this new rule, he can play for the Lakers, play for what other team, but have investments in another NBA team, which I think is kind of interesting because obviously as a pro athlete, you're focusing on your team, yourself, your goals. But if you're invested into another team financially, how is that going to affect how you think about your team, where you're at, where your head is at with how things are going? I think that's just pretty interesting. Another thing that they added, players are also allowed to, another thing, the NBA is they're lifting their marijuana ban, so you can't get suspended for marijuana anymore. Guys like OJ Mayo are like, oh, I should have came into the league a few years earlier. No, I'm just kidding, but you can't get banned for marijuana anymore. Players are actually allowed to, I guess, invest in and sponsor or talk about even like certain marijuana groups that they want to be associated with. So that's something else that's coming with the new CBA. And another thing, the last major thing that I think is important to talk about this is basically the free agent and spending caps that they put on teams. So essentially, teams that have really high payrolls that spend a lot of money aren't going to be allowed to basically do that anymore. They're not going to be allowed to just shell out money, veteran minimums to players. And I think that'll be pretty interesting because teams that are usually willing to spend and be aggressive are the teams that, one, are able to do it because they're big markets, they generate a lot of money, and that's being aggressive in sports always helps out. So I am really fascinated to see how that's going to work out in terms of free agency, how it's going to affect where players go. So that's just some points with the new CBA. I think it's pretty interesting that, honestly, that the players agreed to it because there's there may be some, Draymond brought up some good points about how it may hurt the players, but I don't know. Let me know what your guys' thoughts are on that, the new CBA. Bucks Celtics, are the Bucks doomed if they play Boston in the playoffs? If I were a Bucks fan, I would not want to play the Celtics in the playoffs. I would be praying that Philly is the team you play in the conference finals, or maybe if they do play, they'll make the proper adjustments this time. But the Celtics are a horrible matchup for the Bucks, and if they were to play in the conference finals, I would not be surprised if the Celtics beat them again, and I honestly might just pick them too, based off of how I've seen Milwaukee play them over the past several matchups. And let me know what your guys' thoughts are on March Madness. Obviously, our national championship is set. San Diego State, UConn. What an ending to that San Diego State, Florida Atlantic game. Buzzer beater. That's what March Madness is all about. Let me know what your guys' thoughts are. Even on the start of MLB, that's kicking off. But yeah, there's so much going on in sports right now. NFL draft is coming up. So much going on. Let me know what your guys' thoughts are on all that stuff. And make sure to find the rest of my content linked in the description.